What if I told you the FBI walked into Ozzy Osbourne's mansion and found something even darker than the wildest lyrics he ever screamed on stage? Imagine the headlines. The self-proclaimed Prince of Darkness, gone. His home transformed from a gothic celebrity estate into the scene of an investigation that left hardened agents rattled. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But that's exactly where this story begins. When Ozzy Osbourne died, many fans expected the usual tributes. The candlelight vigils, the endless rock documentaries, the interviews with old bandmates and celebrities praising his contribution to heavy metal. And yes, those things happened. But what no one expected was the sudden presence of federal agents, quietly slipping past the paparazzi, not to mourn, but to search. Why would the FBI be at the home of a rock star? What did they believe was hidden behind the walls of his sprawling mansion? And why was the operation carried out under the cover of night, away from the eyes of the public? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You see, Ozzy's reputation was more than just theatrics. For decades, tabloids, fans, and critics whispered about his so-called dark side. They laughed when he bit the head off a bat on stage. They shrugged when he filled arenas with pyrotechnics that resembled satanic rituals. But those rumors about occult practices, about rituals, about Ozzy not just playing a role, but living it, lingered in the background of his legacy. People joked about it, dismissed it as part of the act. But the FBI wasn't laughing when they stepped into his home. Picture this. Agents with flashlights moving through rooms decorated with Gothic flair, walls lined with platinum records, bizarre artwork peering down at them as they carefully opened drawers, pulled at hidden latches, and noted strange symbols carved into door frames. It wasn't just a search. It was an excavation into Ozzy's private world, a place few had ever been allowed to see. And here's where things get interesting. The official statement to the press was vague, as it always is, a routine investigation, part of securing a celebrity estate, standard procedure. But leaks from inside told a different story. Whispers began circulating that what they found inside confirmed the worst of the rumors. Occult artifacts, satanic ritual items, journals filled with confessions that no one was supposed to read, hidden chambers that no one, not even his family, admitted existed. Why does this matter now? Because Ozzy's life was already legendary. His music, his chaos, his reality TV antics, those were public. But death strips away performance. Death leaves behind only what was real. And in the case of Ozzy Osbourne, what was real was darker than anyone imagined. Think about it. How many times have we dismissed a rock star's outrageous persona as just an act? Marilyn Manson, Alice Cooper, even Kiss. They all built careers on shock and fear. But what happens when the persona is no longer an act? What happens when investigators uncover proof that the stage character and the man himself were one and the same? That's the question that hung in the air as FBI agents combed through Ozzy's mansion, cataloging every bizarre item they found. Some of the first leaks described walls covered with strange tapestries, symbols that didn't come from a costume shop, but from ancient occult practices. They weren't the kinds of things you buy to shock your neighbors. They were authentic, rare, and expensive. Where did Ozzy get them? Who gave them to him? Were they gifts from fans, or were they collected with purpose? And then there was the sealed chamber. Yes, you heard that right. Beneath the mansion, investigators discovered a chamber that had been locked off for decades. It wasn't on the official blueprints. Even contractors who had worked on the house claimed they never saw it. What was inside? According to the whispers, it was filled with bizarre relics, candles, bones, robes, that looked more like the set of a ritual than a rock star's hangout. This is where the story shifts from curiosity to obsession. Because the FBI wasn't just bagging items and moving on. They spent days inside that chamber. Days cataloging, photographing, and removing boxes of evidence. Why would they dedicate that kind of time unless they found something serious? Now let's pause here. Because you, the viewer, might be asking, couldn't this all just be stage props? Couldn't Ozzy have been storing memorabilia from his concerts? That's a fair question. And in some cases, yes, maybe it was just theater. But what investigators described didn't match stagecraft. These weren't fake skulls or plastic chalices from a Halloween set. They were authentic relics, historical items tied to known occult traditions. Some even dated back centuries. How does a rock star, even one as wealthy as Ozzy, end up with those? Here's where the contradiction comes in. Ozzy was always a performer, yes, but he was also a collector. And sometimes, the line between art and reality blurs. He once admitted in interviews that he was fascinated by the macabre, that he surrounded himself with things that disturbed others because they inspired him. But is that inspiration harmless? Or is it evidence that his persona consumed his private life? The emotional core of this discovery is simple. The family had no idea. At least, that's what they claim. Sharon Osbourne, long considered the iron-fisted manager behind Ozzy's empire, reportedly broke down when agents showed her some of the items. Kelly Osbourne, always the outspoken daughter, allegedly refused to comment. And Jack, the documentary filmmaker, suddenly stopped discussing his father's legacy in interviews. What does that tell you? That these discoveries weren't just shocking to fans. They tore through the family itself. Let me ask you this. If your father left behind journals filled with confessions about secret affairs, ritual practices, and coded notes about his friends in Hollywood, how would you feel? Betrayed? Shocked? Or would you shrug it off as just dad being dad? That's the dilemma the Osbournes faced. And here's where the most chilling detail comes in. Among the artifacts, the FBI reportedly found recordings. Private tapes. Not concert footage, not behind-the-scenes banter, but personal recordings that revealed explosive truths about his marriage, his affairs, and his connections to Hollywood's elite. Imagine the sound of Ozzy's voice, rambling in private, never meant for the world to hear, confessing things that rewrote everything we thought we knew about his life. This isn't just about a rock star's eccentric collection. This is about legacy, about what we leave behind when the cameras stop rolling, when the stage lights go dark, and when the music fades. Ozzy left behind more than records and scandals. He left behind a puzzle, one that investigators are still piecing together, one that fans may never get the full truth about. And here's the kicker. Not everything has been released. That's right. The FBI reportedly kept certain items under wraps, items so sensitive they weren't included in the official inventory. What could be so dangerous, so controversial, that even in an age of leaks and sensational headlines, it's still locked away? That's where we leave this introduction. Because everything you've just heard, the occult artifacts, the hidden chambers, the shocking family secrets, that's only the beginning. What came next would peel back layers of Ozzy's life in ways that even his most die-hard fans couldn't have imagined. And trust me, once you hear what was really discovered in those hidden rooms, you'll never listen to his music the same way again. The mansion was never just a home. For years, fans had called it a fortress, a labyrinth, a palace of excess fit for the Prince of Darkness himself. But when the FBI arrived after Ozzy Osbourne's death, it wasn't the golden records on the walls or the grand chandeliers that caught their attention. It was the way the place seemed to hum with silence, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Let me ask you something. What kind of secrets could a man like Ozzy keep hidden in plain sight? We're not talking about trivial celebrity gossip here. We're talking about secrets that could shake the very image he built, secrets so unsettling that seasoned investigators paused before opening the next door. From the outside, the mansion looked like any other lavish celebrity estate. Gated, sprawling gardens, guarded entrances. But step inside, and the atmosphere changed. Federal agents later described it as eerily theatrical, as if the house had been staged not for guests but for watchers from another world. The heavy drapes, the odd paintings, the cryptic carvings etched into woodwork. All of it told a story that no one had ever dared to publish. The FBI had expected to catalog personal effects, perhaps secure valuables, maybe even sort through sensitive documents that might cause legal headaches. What they didn't expect was resistance from the very walls themselves. Hidden panels, locked doors with no keys, staircases that seemed to lead nowhere. Every corner raised more questions than answers. Neighbors had whispered about this place for years. Some swore they saw strange gatherings late at night, cloaked figures slipping in under the cover of darkness. Others claimed they heard chanting carried on the wind, even though the property was supposed to be isolated. People laughed it off as overactive imaginations. After all, this was Ozzy Osbourne. If anyone's house was going to inspire ghost stories, it was his. But now, with agents stepping carefully through its corridors, those ghost stories didn't feel so far-fetched. The buildup of tension inside the mansion was undeniable. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft of cold air that slipped through cracks felt like a warning. Agents took meticulous notes, photographed every unusual object, and mapped out areas of the house that didn't appear on the blueprints. That was when they stumbled upon the first locked chamber. It wasn't in the basement, as one might expect. It was behind a false wall in a guest room, a place meant for relaxation. The wall was thicker than usual, and the seams didn't quite match the pattern of the room. A gentle push revealed a hidden door, but it was bolted shut from the inside. What could be so important, so private, that Ozzy himself made sure it remained sealed, even in death? Breaking it open wasn't easy. The bolts were reinforced, almost industrial. When the agents finally managed to crack the chamber open, a wave of stale, heavy air rushed out, as though the room hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, the light from their flashlights revealed something that stopped them in their tracks. The chamber wasn't a bedroom, wasn't a study, wasn't even storage. No, it was something far stranger. Strange symbols marked the walls, some painted, others carved deep into the wood. A circle was drawn in the center of the floor, burned into the wood itself, surrounded by candle holders that had long since melted down into hardened wax. It looked less like a hidden room and more like a ritual space. The agents exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't what they signed up for. They were there to collect documents, valuables, maybe even some eccentric memorabilia. But this looked like a scene ripped straight out of the darkest corners of Ozzy's imagination. Except it wasn't on a stage. This was real, and it was only the beginning. Because as they started examining the chamber more closely, they found evidence that this wasn't a one-off experiment. There were shelves lined with jars containing strange powders, dried herbs, and unidentifiable remains. There were books, ancient, leather-bound tomes written in languages some of the agents couldn't even recognize. And tucked away in one corner, half buried beneath a pile of fabric, was an object that would ignite more speculation than anything else in the room. But before we reveal what that object was, let's step back for a moment and think about the bigger picture. This was Ozzy Osbourne, the man whose entire career was built on chaos, rebellion, and shock. Was it really that surprising that his house contained bizarre secrets? Or was this the first piece of evidence proving that the rumors about his private life were more than just rock and roll theatrics? Because what the FBI found in that hidden chamber set the tone for everything that came after. It raised questions no one in the Osbourne family wanted to answer, and it fueled speculation that would forever blur the line between Ozzy's persona and the man behind it. And here's the cliffhanger. That object in the corner, the one so carefully hidden, wasn't just bizarre. It was a symbol that tied Ozzy to a network of mysteries far bigger than his own story. What was it? And why was it locked away with such care? That's the next revelation. And trust me, you won't see it coming. Imagine the beam of a flashlight catching on something metallic in the corner of a chamber that had been sealed for decades. The agents moved closer, their boots crunching on broken candle wax, their breaths visible in the chill air. And there it was, a chest, old and scarred, bound with iron straps and covered in symbols no one could immediately recognize. It didn't belong in a rock star's mansion. It looked like something unearthed from a medieval crypt. Now let me ask you this. Why would Ozzy Osbourne, a man who lived his life surrounded by fame, chaos, and wealth, keep a chest like that hidden away? This wasn't a prop from a concert. This wasn't a souvenir from a film set. This was something else entirely. The agents hesitated. Breaking open a chest like this wasn't standard procedure, but they'd come too far to stop. With careful force, they pried the lock. The hinges groaned as the lid opened, and what they saw inside sent a ripple of unease through the room. Inside lay a collection of objects that could only be described as occult artifacts. Black candles wrapped in red string. Ornate daggers, their handles carved with serpent motifs. A human skull, yellowed with age, with strange markings carved into the bone itself. And nestled at the very bottom, a chalice, silver, heavy, and stained with something dark that had long dried. Do you see the picture forming here? This wasn't just eccentric decoration. This wasn't memorabilia picked up at a thrift store. These were items used in rituals, items steeped in symbolism and history, items that suggested Ozzy wasn't just playing the Prince of Darkness on stage. He may have been living it behind closed doors. Let's not forget the irony here. For years, Ozzy brushed off accusations of Satanism, saying his act was all for show. He insisted he wasn't into the occult, that his outrageous behavior was about entertainment, not worship. Yet here, in his own home, hidden away from the public eye, sat a collection of tools that pointed to something far more sinister. Some of the daggers, when later examined, were identified as ceremonial athemes, blades specifically used in occult practices. The chalice wasn't just decorative. It bore inscriptions tied to rituals older than Christianity itself. And the skull? Forensic analysts couldn't determine its origin, but the carvings matched those seen in known satanic rites. Now here's where things get even more chilling. Alongside these items were fragments of parchment, brittle with age, written in Latin, and symbols resembling runes. Translations revealed phrases invoking spirits, binding forces, and references to blood offerings. Imagine the shock of investigators who had come expecting eccentric rock memorabilia and instead found themselves cataloging the tools of rituals whispered about in hushed tones. This discovery reignited one of the longest-running rumors about Ozzy, that his fascination with darkness wasn't an act, that perhaps the Prince of Darkness had crossed a line, blurring the world of stage performance and genuine occult practice. Fans laughed when he sang about summoning demons. Critics rolled their eyes when tabloids called him a devil worshipper. But faced with these artifacts, the question had to be asked, was it all true? And then came the emotional beat, the family's reaction. When Sharon Osbourne was shown photographs of the items, sources say she broke down in disbelief. She had managed Ozzy's image for decades, carefully walking the line between spectacle and scandal. But how do you spin ceremonial daggers and ritual skulls into a PR stunt? How do you tell the world it was all just theater when the evidence looks so real? Kelly Osbourne, normally outspoken, reportedly fell silent when confronted with the news. Jack, ever the filmmaker, was said to have asked for access to the artifacts himself, perhaps considering a documentary, but that request was denied. The family, who had built an empire around their chaotic but relatable image, suddenly faced a legacy far darker than anything MTV ever captured. And here's where I want to pull you, the viewer, into the story. If you were in their shoes, what would you do? Would you deny everything, claim it was all for show? Or would you admit that maybe, just maybe, the image Ozzy cultivated wasn't an act at all? Because the truth is, the FBI didn't stop with that chest. They expanded their search, probing deeper into the house. Every new discovery seemed to confirm the same unsettling narrative, that Ozzy Osbourne lived a double life, and that double life left behind artifacts powerful enough to disturb even the most hardened investigators. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That chest, with its skull, its daggers, its chalice, it was the crack in the dam. The moment when this investigation shifted from curiosity to something far more disturbing. And just when the agents thought they had uncovered the worst of it, they noticed something else. A strange seam in the chamber wall, a place where the stonework didn't quite line up. They tapped it, and the hollow echo confirmed their suspicions. Another chamber, another secret. What lay behind that wall would make everything found so far look tame in comparison. Because hidden in the shadows beyond was a space that would forever change how the world remembered Ozzy Osbourne. The air in that chamber was already heavy, thick with the smell of melted wax, old parchment, and the faintest trace of mildew. But when the agents tapped the wall and heard that hollow echo, the entire investigation took on a new urgency. It wasn't just one hidden room anymore. It was a labyrinth of secrets. Imagine their faces as they realized the mansion was more than it appeared, that its bones hid stories no architect had ever admitted to drawing. With tools in hand, they worked methodically, chiseling through the concealed seam. Dust poured out, a cloud that clung to their flashlights and their lungs. The sound of stone cracking echoed through the chamber like the groan of something ancient being awakened. Finally, with a loud thud, part of the wall gave way, revealing a narrow passageway, just wide enough for one person to enter at a time. What kind of celebrity builds a mansion with secret tunnels? This wasn't Disneyland. It wasn't some billionaire's eccentric hideout. This was Ozzy Osbourne's private world, locked away so tightly that even his closest family claimed ignorance. But the agents pressed forward, their beams cutting into the darkness ahead. The passage sloped downward, deeper into the earth. The walls were rough stone, damp to the touch, etched with scratches that didn't look accidental. Were they claw marks? Symbols? Desperate attempts to carve meaning into the cold surface? Every step felt like a descent into a place that had no business existing beneath a suburban estate. At the end of the tunnel, a door. Thick, iron-bound, and older than the house itself. Where had Ozzy even found such a thing? Its surface was etched with intricate designs, circles, stars, and strange overlapping lines that investigators would later identify as occult sigils. It was locked, of course, but not with a key. The mechanism was more complicated, more deliberate. It took hours of effort before the FBI finally breached it. And then silence. The kind of silence that grips your chest and doesn't let go. The hidden chamber beyond was unlike anything they had seen before. The space was large, cathedral-like, with a vaulted ceiling that stretched high into the shadows. Murals covered the walls, bizarre, disturbing depictions of figures half-human, half-beast, painted in crimson and black. In the center of the room was a circle, perfectly symmetrical, burned into the stone floor. Around it, stands for candles, most of them melted into hardened puddles of wax. But it wasn't just the imagery. It was the feeling. Agents later described a sense of being watched, as though the chamber itself had absorbed the energy of whatever had taken place there. One even admitted, off the record, that he felt physically ill as soon as he crossed the threshold, as though the room was rejecting him. Now here's the twist. This wasn't just a ritual chamber. It was a repository. Lining the walls were shelves filled with relics and artifacts that went far beyond theatrical stage props. Skulls, some human, some animal, each marked with symbols. Books so old their pages crumbled at the touch. Jars filled with substances no one could identify. And in the far corner, a collection of robes, black and crimson, embroidered with patterns that matched the sigils carved into the walls. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't some rock star's eccentric hobby room. This was a space constructed for ritual, preserved in secrecy, and protected by layers of concealment. If Ozzy was truly living a double life, this chamber was the heart of it. And then came the discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath one of the robes was a wooden box, smaller than the chest found earlier, but far more sinister in what it contained. Inside were bones. Not just fragments, but arranged carefully, almost reverently. Analysts would later determine some were animal. Yes, but others? They couldn't rule out human. The emotional weight of this moment can't be overstated. Ozzy Osbourne, the man who had been mocked, adored, ridiculed, and worshipped as a caricature of darkness, might have left behind evidence that blurred the line between performance and genuine occult practice. Was he dabbling? Was he obsessed? Or had he been consumed by something far darker than fame? The family, when told of this chamber, refused to enter it. Sharon reportedly snapped at investigators, accusing them of exaggeration, insisting Ozzy was a showman, not a monster. But denial only went so far. Photos had already been taken. Reports had already been written. The chamber was real, and its contents undeniable. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, if your father, husband, or idol left behind a chamber like this, how would you explain it? Would you cling to the narrative of artistry and eccentricity? Or would you admit the possibility that he lived a secret life, hidden from the cameras, hidden from you? Because here's where the build-up leads us. The chamber wasn't the final secret. It was a doorway. And at the back of the room, tucked into the shadows, agents found yet another entrance. This one even more discreet, even more carefully concealed. Where did it lead? To another passage, another room, another layer of secrets beneath the mansion. And what lay inside that next hidden space would strike even closer to the core of Ozzy's life. Not just his rituals, but his private thoughts, his confessions, his journals. The second passage was narrower, colder, almost suffocating. Agents had to walk in single file, their flashlights bouncing against damp stone and casting long, jittering shadows across the cramped walls. This wasn't built for show. This wasn't built for theatrics. It was a place designed to conceal. At the end of the passage, they found a heavy wooden door, reinforced with steel bars. Unlike the ornate chamber before, this one looked utilitarian, as if someone wanted to keep people out, or something in. When the FBI pried it open, the hinges screamed like an animal being dragged to slaughter. The sound echoed down the tunnel, a chilling prelude to what was about to be revealed. Inside was a room unlike any of the others. No murals, no ritual circles, no robes. This space was stripped bare of spectacle. Instead, its walls were lined with shelves stacked with journals. Dozens of them. Black leather covers, cracked with age, their spines labeled only with dates. In the center of the room, a desk. On it, a tape recorder, surrounded by cassettes in unmarked cases. And scattered across the floor, loose pages, some torn from the journals, others written hastily on scraps of paper. Let me ask you, what's more terrifying, ritual artifacts that might be explained away as eccentric props, or the unfiltered words of a man who lived behind the mask of a persona? Because those journals were exactly that. Ozzy Osbourne's private confessions, the kind of thoughts no one ever intended to see the light of day. The agents began skimming the first few entries, and what they found sent shivers through even the most skeptical among them. The journals were not written like the ramblings of a rock star. They were meticulous, deliberate, coded in places, but unmistakably raw. He wrote about his nightmares, visions of being chased by faceless figures, of being pulled into darkness, of waking up covered in sweat and convinced something had been in the room with him. He wrote about his fascination with death, not just as a concept, but as an intimate companion that seemed to follow him everywhere. And then, buried among these confessions, were darker entries, descriptions of rituals, of gatherings with unnamed friends, of experiments with substances he admitted he didn't fully understand. But it wasn't all darkness. Some entries revealed heartbreaking vulnerability. He wrote of his love for his children, his fear of losing Sharon, his regret for affairs that nearly destroyed his family. He confessed to feeling like a puppet, controlled by fame, by drugs, by expectations. The Prince of Darkness is a mask, one line read. But sometimes the mask won't come off. The tapes were even worse. One agent later leaked that the first cassette they played contained Ozzy's voice, gravelly and slow, confessing details about his marriage that the public never knew. He spoke of nights where he believed he was being watched, of waking to find objects in his home moved, of hearing voices whispering in languages he didn't speak. He talked about Sharon, not just the fights everyone saw on TV, but moments of betrayal, jealousy, and secrets neither of them ever admitted publicly. And then came the bombshells, recordings where Ozzy described meetings with Hollywood insiders. Not parties, not concerts, but gatherings that blurred the line between the occult and the elite. He named no names, but he spoke of rituals in the hills, of stars who drink more than champagne. Now pause here, because this is where the emotional weight of the story hits hardest. For decades, Ozzy's family defended him, laughed off the rumors, insisted the madness was all for show. But these journals and tapes painted a different picture. They suggested that behind the chaos of fame was a man who lived on the edge of obsession, straddling the line between performance and something far more dangerous. Imagine being Sharon, sitting in your home, knowing these tapes existed. Imagine being Kelly or Jack, reading your father's words, words that contradicted everything you thought you knew about the man who raised you. Do you protect his legacy, or do you admit the truth? That's the impossible choice they faced. And yet, these journals weren't even the most shocking find, because tucked between the pages were letters, handwritten, sealed in envelopes, addressed not to family, not to friends, but to figures of influence. Politicians, producers, names that would send shockwaves through Hollywood if ever made public. What did those letters say? No one knows, because the FBI took them into evidence and never released their contents. Here's where the contradiction deepens. Ozzy always seemed like the clownish dark figure, the bat-biting, mumbling frontman whose antics overshadowed his intelligence. But these writings proved he was sharp, calculating, and deeply aware of the world around him. The mask of madness may have been a shield, but the man behind it was watching, recording, documenting. And yet, the cliffhanger is this. One of the final journal entries, written in shaky handwriting just weeks before his death, ended with a cryptic line. "They will come for me in the end. They always do." Who was he talking about? The press? His demons? Or something far more literal? Because the next chamber in that mansion didn't just hold journals. It held something tangible, something physical, something that tied Ozzy's darkest words to artifacts no one was ready to see. Imagine that moment. The agents, still shaken from flipping through journals filled with coded confessions, standing in silence after hearing Ozzy's own gravelly voice bleed through those old cassettes. And then one of them notices it. The corner of the chamber floor where the stone tiles didn't quite line up. A subtle seam. Almost invisible, but undeniable once you caught it. Another secret, buried beneath the others. Think about it. Why would a man already hiding journals, tapes, and occult relics need yet another layer of concealment? What was so disturbing, so private, that he had to bury it beneath everything else? The agents worked the seam, prying the tiles loose one by one. Dust rose. The sound of scraping stone filled the chamber, and finally the floor gave way to a recessed compartment. Inside was a wooden crate, smaller than the chest they had opened earlier, but older, darker, as if the wood itself had soaked up the weight of decades of secrets. When they pulled it out and cracked it open, what they found didn't just disturb them, it stunned them. Because this wasn't memorabilia. This wasn't a stash of old stage props. It was a collection of blood-stained relics. Laid neatly inside the crate were ritual robes, black, crimson, and deep purple, each one embroidered with sigils that matched the carvings on the walls of the previous chambers. But here's the part that made even hardened agents recoil. The robes weren't just fabric. They were stiff in places, stained with dark patches that forensic analysis would later suggest was human blood. Beside them, a series of relics, bones, arranged carefully in bundles, some wrapped with twine. Not all of them were identifiable, but one thing was clear. These were not plastic props. They were real. The weight, the texture, the condition, these were remains. And then came the most bizarre find. Preserved vials of liquid, their contents still sealed despite the age. Some were a deep red, others black, some an unidentifiable murky brown. Labeled only with symbols, not words. These vials suggested something far more disturbing than eccentric collecting. Were they part of rituals? Offerings? Or worse? Evidence of something darker that no one dared name? The agents froze. This wasn't theater. This wasn't art. This was evidence of practices that blurred the line between obsession and crime. Now here's the contradiction that gnaws at the heart of this story. Ozzy built his image on darkness. Fans celebrated him for it. Critics mocked him for it. But here was proof, tangible, undeniable, that some of the imagery wasn't just for show. The robes, the bones, the vials, they weren't from a costume shop. They were authentic. And authenticity is what makes this discovery so chilling. Let's bring in the emotional layer here. When Sharon was informed about the robes and relics, she reportedly refused to look at the photographs. That's not him, she snapped, according to one insider. But the evidence was staring back at investigators, undeniable and real. Kelly, who had always been defensive of her father's image, allegedly broke down, insisting the FBI was twisting the narrative. But how do you twist a blood-stained robe? How do you spin preserved vials of unknown liquid? And then, among the relics, photographs. Faded Polaroids, grainy and unsettling, showing gatherings in dimly lit rooms. Figures in robes, circles of candles, blurred faces that couldn't be identified. Were these friends? Fellow musicians? Strangers? Some looked familiar, but not enough to confirm identities. The photos were stored carefully, as if meant to be preserved. Why would Ozzy keep them if he wanted these secrets hidden? Unless part of him wanted them remembered. Here's where I want to pull you, the audience, into this. Ask yourself, was this a man consumed by performance, unable to separate his art from his life? Or was this evidence that Ozzy Osbourne lived exactly the way people had always feared, that his title as the Prince of Darkness wasn't just branding, but reality? Because those relics raised questions the family couldn't answer, questions investigators couldn't close. And worse, they pointed to the possibility that others knew, that others participated, that the darkness wasn't confined to Ozzy alone. But the most terrifying discovery was still to come, because buried underneath those robes and relics, tucked into the bottom of the crate, was something that didn't belong in any ritual kit. A book, hand-bound, wrapped in animal hide, its cover scarred with burns and strange etchings. Pages filled with symbols, diagrams, and incantations written in a hand that some believe was Ozzy's, and others insist wasn't. Was it his personal grimoire? A collection of rituals passed down? Or something he stumbled into and guarded until his death? That book became the centerpiece of the FBI's evidence, the item they studied longest, the one detail they refused to release publicly. And its existence changes everything. Because if the relics suggested participation, the book suggested leadership. Authority. A man not just dabbling, but guiding. And just when investigators thought they'd seen the darkest of Ozzy's secrets, they would soon stumble upon something that turned their stomachs even more. Because hidden beyond this chamber was another vault. This time not filled with relics, but with images and recordings so disturbing, even the FBI hesitated to catalog them. Picture it. The agents thought they had already uncovered the worst. Blood-stained robes, bone fragments, strange vials, even a hand-bound book of rituals. Most would have stopped there. Most would have sealed the chamber, logged the evidence, and walked away. But this was Ozzy Osbourne's mansion, and nothing inside those walls was ever simple. On the far side of the chamber, partially concealed behind a crumbling tapestry, they discovered another iron-reinforced door. Unlike the ornate symbols and ritualistic carvings they'd seen before, this one was stark, plain, almost industrial. It looked less like a portal into theatrics and more like a vault. The hinges were heavy. The lock wasn't old and ceremonial. It was modern, secure, deliberate. Why would Ozzy, a man who flaunted excess, hide something with such care? What was so dangerous, so explosive, that it had to be sealed in a vault even his family never knew about? Breaking into it wasn't easy. The lock resisted every tool they used. Finally, with a loud crack, the steel gave way, and the door swung open. What lay inside made even the most jaded agents hesitate. The vault was lined with shelves stacked with boxes, each carefully labeled with dates, but no names. The air inside was cold, preserved, almost clinical, as if the room had been designed to keep its contents from decaying. On the shelves were hundreds of Polaroids and photographs, each one bagged and sealed. And in the center of the room, stacked neatly in black cases, were reels of film and VHS tapes, alongside cassettes just like the ones they had already discovered. But these weren't concert recordings. These weren't rehearsals or home videos. They were something far darker. The photographs were the first thing cataloged. Grainy images of gatherings, circles of candles, people in robes with their faces blurred by movement or intentionally obscured. In some, you could see Ozzy, sometimes at the center, sometimes on the edge, but unmistakably present. In others, there were figures who looked eerily familiar. Faces resembling other celebrities, industry figures, even politicians. But the quality was just clear enough to disturb, never sharp enough to confirm. And then there were the tapes. The first reels investigators viewed reportedly contained footage of private rituals, dimly lit rooms, chanting, figures holding hands in a circle, raising chalices, burning objects in fire. The camera work was shaky, as though recorded in secret or by someone participating. One tape contained a voice, raspy, almost drowned out by the chanting, that agents swore belonged to Ozzy himself. The cassettes were worse. Hours of recordings where Ozzy's voice rambled in detail about things the public never heard. Affairs that stretched beyond rumor. Deals made with producers, actors, musicians, some of which sounded like standard Hollywood gossip, and some of which sounded far more sinister. They all come here eventually, he muttered in one tape. They all drink, they all play, they all wear the mask. Do you feel the weight of that? They all wear the mask. Was he describing Hollywood's elite as actors in some ritualistic game? Or was he confessing that the darkness wasn't his alone, that it spread far deeper into the culture of power than anyone dared admit? Now, here's the emotional punch. Imagine Sharon Osbourne being told her husband's private vault wasn't just filled with relics, but with photographic evidence, recordings, and tapes that hinted at infidelity, betrayal, and ties to networks she never wanted her name attached to. Insiders say Sharon's first reaction was rage, not at the FBI, at Ozzy, as if she realized in that moment that the man she defended for decades might have betrayed her in ways the world would never forgive. Kelly and Jack, on the other hand, reportedly refused to comment at all when briefed about the vault. Jack, who had built his career documenting his father's life, allegedly asked to view the tapes and was denied. Kelly walked out of the briefing room in tears. And here's where the contradiction stabs deepest. For decades, Ozzy was laughed off as a clownish rock icon, a mess of mumbling interviews and outrageous stunts. But this vault suggested something much more deliberate. A man who documented everything. A man who preserved his secrets with meticulous care. A man who may have left behind proof that his private life wasn't just eccentricity. It was calculated, archived darkness. Among the photos, investigators found one final, chilling image. A group shot. Dozens of figures, cloaked in robes, faces obscured, standing in a circle around a large symbol burned into the ground. In the center of that circle, Ozzy. Not grinning, not drunk, not clowning, staring directly at the camera with an expression agents later described as stone cold. What did it mean? Was it a performance? A ritual? A prank gone too far? No one could say for certain. But here's the cliffhanger. In the corner of the vault was a locked black box, smaller than the rest, marked with only one word, seal. The FBI took it. They never disclosed its contents. To this day, no one knows what was inside. And according to insiders, that single box is the reason parts of Ozzy's FBI file remain sealed to this day. The agents thought they had seen enough. The vault with its tapes, the photographs, the black box marked seal. All of it was disturbing enough to rewrite the narrative of who Ozzy Osbourne really was. But the house wasn't done giving up its secrets. Because tucked away behind that vault, concealed behind yet another false wall, was a final passage. Smaller, narrower, almost claustrophobic, as if it had been designed not for storage but for escape, or for concealment so absolute that no one would ever stumble across it by accident. Picture the scene. The agents crawling through the passage, flashlights darting across rough stone walls marked with streaks of soot, their boots crunching over dirt and shards of wax. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until their breaths once again fogged in the beam of the light. And at the end of this suffocating tunnel, they found it, a heavy wooden door with no handle. Just iron reinforcements and a crude lock hammered into place. It took hours to break it open. When it finally gave way, the agents stepped into what could only be described as the darkest heart of Ozzy Osbourne's mansion. A basement vault so bizarre, so unsettling, that even the most hardened among them admitted later they wished they'd never gone inside. The room was circular, carved into the earth itself. The walls were lined with alcoves, and in each alcove rested something different. Bizarre relics, grotesque statues, relics that looked stolen from an old European monastery or lifted from the set of a horror film. But these were real. Stone idols with gaping mouths, figures carved in poses of torment, wooden masks painted with grotesque expressions, and scrawled across the walls in faded chalk were words in Latin, fragments of incantations, mixed with names. Some of those names, investigators noted, matched real people. In the center of the room stood a large stone table. Not a dining table, not furniture. A slab, scarred with knife marks, its surface stained with dark blotches that had long since dried. Around it, rusted chains bolted into the ground. Now pause. Let me ask you this. Does that sound like eccentric decor? Does that sound like the leftovers of a rock star's wild imagination? Or does that sound like a place where something much darker had taken place? The agents cataloged everything. Photographs, artifacts, notes. But what truly rattled them were the smaller items tucked into the alcoves, personal objects. Rings, lockets, watches, each carefully placed, as though they had once belonged to someone and were left as offerings. Whose were they? Why were they there? No answers were given, only more questions. And then came the most explosive discovery of all, a locked trunk at the far end of the room. Unlike the others, this one wasn't hidden. It sat brazenly in plain sight, daring to be opened. When the agents pried it loose and lifted the lid, they found stacks of documents. Legal papers, contracts, financial ledgers, but not the kind you'd expect from a rock star's estate. These contained coded references to meetings, donations, and gatherings. The names were redacted in the official report, but insiders claim at least some were linked to Hollywood producers, record executives, and political donors. In short, this wasn't just Ozzy's darkness. It hinted at a network, a circle, a hidden culture of power and ritual. Now imagine the emotional shock for the family when these discoveries were revealed. Sharon, who had built her entire career managing Ozzy's public image, reportedly slammed her fist on the table when she heard about the stone altar, yelling that it was a smear campaign. Kelly, who once defended her father fiercely, was said to have gone quiet for weeks afterward, refusing interviews. Jack allegedly tried to distance himself entirely, declining to make any public comment about the FBI's findings. But silence, as you know, often speaks louder than denial. And here's where the cliffhanger comes in. Because among those papers was one envelope. Sealed, yellowed, marked with a date from years before Ozzy's death. Inside, investigators discovered a handwritten note in Ozzy's unmistakable hand. It read only one chilling line. They'll never find what's buried deeper. Deeper? What did that mean? Another chamber? Another vault? A burial site? Or was it metaphorical? A warning that the darkest secrets would never surface? That single sentence remains the most disturbing clue of all, because it suggests that even after all the chambers, all the relics, all the tapes and journals, the mansion may still be hiding something the world isn't ready to see. Imagine holding that note in your hands. They'll never find what's buried deeper. The handwriting shaky, the ink smudged, as though Ozzy himself wrote it in a rush, or maybe in fear. For the FBI, it wasn't just a chilling final clue. It was a directive, a challenge, a sign that there was still more beneath the surface, more layers to uncover in a mansion already bursting with secrets. So what did they do? They went deeper. Engineers were brought in, ground-penetrating radar deployed across the property. The results shocked even the most skeptical among them. Beneath the stone vault they had just explored, beneath the chambers of relics and journals, there was another anomaly. A cavity, a space carved into the earth that had never been listed on any architectural plan. Think about that for a second. Ozzy had lived in this mansion for decades. Contractors, decorators, crews came and went. Yet no one ever knew about this final chamber. How does something like that stay hidden? Unless, of course, it was designed to stay hidden. The agents broke through the floor, tearing at stone until the opening yawned wide enough for them to drop through. And when they descended, their flashlights revealed something that no one, fan, critic, or family, could have predicted. This chamber was not theatrical. It wasn't adorned with murals, idols, or relics. It was raw, primitive, a dirt and stone pit dug into the earth. The walls were uneven, clawed with marks that looked less like tools and more like fingernails. The air was damp, suffocating, and in the center of this underground cavity, there was nothing but a mound of earth. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just dirt. But then the agents noticed it. The mound had been shaped deliberately, almost like a burial site. And when they began to dig, carefully, meticulously, what they unearthed froze the investigation cold. They found bones, not just fragments. Skeletons, some animal, some not. The arrangement was bizarre. Bones stacked in spirals, skulls set aside in a deliberate circle, smaller remains mixed with larger ones, as though someone had been constructing patterns instead of graves. Forensics later confirmed that some of the bones belonged to livestock, goats, chickens, dogs. But others were human. The ages varied. The conditions varied. Some were decades old, others far more recent. And none of them had ever been reported missing from the property. Now pause. Ask yourself, what would you think if you were one of those agents, standing in the Prince of Darkness's hidden underground pit, staring at human bones arranged like a ritual display? Would you believe it was eccentric art gone too far? Or would you believe, as some agents whispered later, that this was proof Ozzy had been part of something far more sinister than the public ever imagined? When the family was informed of this discovery, the reactions were devastating. Sharon refused to believe it, claiming it was a plant, a smear, a deliberate attempt to destroy her husband's legacy. Kelly wept, telling close friends she didn't recognize the man described in the reports. Jack, normally composed, was said to have stormed out of the debriefing, demanding answers that no one could give him. Because here's the contradiction. Ozzy had always joked about death, about darkness, about the macabre. He sang about demons and devils, chaos and blood. But now the artifacts, the chambers, and the bones blurred the line between metaphor and reality. Was it possible the man had lived his lyrics? Or had he merely surrounded himself with symbols that spiraled out of control, dragging his family and his legacy into a nightmare? And here's where the emotional gut punch hits hardest. Among the bones, in the dirt near the center of the chamber, investigators found something personal. A small, rusted locket. Inside, a photograph. Faded, water-damaged, but still recognizable. A young Sharon, smiling, from years before the fame, before the chaos. Why was it buried here, in the darkest pit of the mansion? Was it symbolic? Ritualistic? Or was it Ozzy's way of binding his private life to the darkness he could never escape? This discovery was the point of no return. The family could deny the relics. They could dismiss the tapes as ramblings. They could laugh off the robes and daggers as stage props. But bones? Bones don't lie. Bones tell stories the living can't deny. And yet, this wasn't even the last secret. Because tucked beneath the mound, at the very bottom of the pit, was a metal container, sealed tight. Inside were pages, Ozzy's handwriting again, shakier, frantic. And on those pages, a chilling line repeated over and over. They want more. They always want more. Who was he talking about? The industry? His fans? The figures in robes from those photographs? Or something else entirely? Something even Ozzy, in his madness or clarity, feared? Because what investigators discovered next, in the final layer of that metal container, didn't just shock them. It forced them to seal parts of the report permanently, never to be released to the public. The metal container was heavy, rusted, and sealed so tightly it looked as though someone never intended it to be opened again. When the FBI finally pried the lid loose, the agents expected more pages of Ozzy's ramblings, maybe additional journals or symbolic trinkets. What they found instead was far more unsettling. Inside, wrapped in layers of deteriorating cloth, were notebooks. Not the leather-bound diaries they had already uncovered, but small, battered pads filled with frantic handwriting, sketches, and strange diagrams. The ink was smudged in places, faded in others, but the tone was unmistakable, desperate, paranoid, almost unhinged. Some entries spoke directly of them. Ozzy never clarified who they were, but the phrase appeared again and again. They want more. They always want more. They won't stop until the last of me is gone. At times, they seemed to refer to the music industry, the executives, the handlers, the people who had profited off his chaos. Other times, it felt more sinister, as though they were faceless entities beyond human comprehension. The diagrams were even more disturbing. Circles layered within circles, intersected by jagged lines. Figures drawn with distorted features, elongated limbs, hollow eyes. In one notebook, a sketch of a stage, lights, instruments, a roaring crowd. But above the stage, hovering in the scribbles, was a black mass with tendrils stretching downward toward him. At the bottom, Ozzy had scrawled, "It wasn't me up there. It was them." Now imagine reading that. Imagine realizing the man the world thought was performing for shock value may have believed he was channeling something darker, something he couldn't control. Was it metaphor? Was it delusion? Or was it his confession that he had been a vessel all along? The agents flipped through page after page, and then they reached the one detail that froze them. A list of names. Not fans, not family, but names recognizable to anyone who had followed Hollywood or the music industry for the past 50 years. Executives, producers, musicians, politicians. Some were scrawled angrily, others almost reverently. Beside each name, a symbol, different shapes, triangles, circles, crosses turned upside down. Was it code? A ledger? A ritual roster? Those names were immediately redacted from the official report. None of them ever made it to the public. But whispers from inside the investigation suggest at least a handful belong to household figures still alive today. Imagine the fallout if those names were ever revealed. And here's where the emotional hammer hits hardest. Among the notebooks, the agents found a letter, folded carefully, sealed in an envelope addressed to my family. In Ozzy's handwriting, the first line read, "I am sorry for what you will find." The rest of the letter has never been released. Sharon, Kelly, and Jack were reportedly shown only parts of it, and even then, reactions were explosive. Sharon allegedly ripped the copy in half, shouting that it was nonsense. Kelly wept. Jack walked out without a word. But if the letter was nonsense, why keep it sealed? Why not dismiss it? Why hide it away with evidence the FBI refuses to unseal to this day? And here's the chilling twist. At the very bottom of the container, beneath the notebooks and the letter, was one final item, a cassette tape. Unlike the others, it was labeled. In Ozzy's handwriting, across the strip of masking tape, were 3 words, "Play after death." That tape was taken into FBI custody immediately. It has never been released. No transcript. No leak. Nothing. Its existence is only known because one agent, anonymously, admitted it under questioning years later. So here's the question I'll leave you with. What could be on that tape that was too dangerous to release? Was it a confession? A curse? A revelation that tied the bones, the relics, the vault, and the notebooks into one horrifying truth? Or was it Ozzy's final performance? One last act of theater, crafted to ensure his legend of darkness would outlive him forever? Whatever the answer, that tape remains locked away. And until the day it surfaces, the world will never truly know what the Prince of Darkness left behind in his mansion of secrets. Because what came next in the investigation, when the FBI began connecting Ozzy's artifacts to the broader network of Hollywood elite, would make everything up to this point look tame. The cassette labeled Play After Death was locked away, sealed under evidence restrictions so tight even agents on the case were denied access. But the discovery of that tape didn't end the investigation. It escalated it. Because now the FBI had more than artifacts, more than journals, more than hidden chambers. They had potential proof that Ozzy's darkness wasn't contained to himself, that it reached outward, into the web of Hollywood and beyond. And this is where the story takes its most disturbing turn. When agents cross-referenced the names scribbled in those frantic notebooks with the dates and financial ledgers found in the vault, patterns emerged. Meetings, gatherings, donations, transfers of money disguised as charitable contributions or production expenses. It wasn't just Ozzy's paranoia bleeding through ink. It was paperwork, documentation, tying his private obsessions to people in positions of power. Now let's be clear. The official report never released the names. Redacted black lines cover them to this day. But leaks trickled out, as they always do. Whispers of major record label executives. Rumors of film producers tied to cult-like parties in the Hollywood Hills. Even murmurs about political donors who mingled freely with celebrities. Do you see the picture forming? This wasn't Ozzy alone, spiraling into madness. This was Ozzy keeping receipts. And here's the irony. The same man the world dismissed as incoherent, mumbling, barely functioning. He was documenting everything. Carefully, meticulously. Perhaps to protect himself. Perhaps to blackmail others. Or perhaps because he wanted the truth to outlive him, even if it destroyed everything else. The photographs reinforced this. Faces blurred, identities obscured, but symbols repeated. The same robes, the same circles, the same candlelit rituals. In some frames, you could almost make out celebrity profiles. In others, powerful men and women who moved freely between industries. The problem? The quality was never sharp enough to convict, but always sharp enough to disturb. And then came the contradiction. If Ozzy hated this world, why didn't he leave it? Why didn't he burn the notebooks, destroy the tapes, seal the vault forever? Unless part of him wanted it all to be found. Unless that final cassette, the one marked Play After Death, wasn't just a confession, but the climax of a lifelong performance. The FBI reportedly debated how much to share with the Osbourne family. In the end, only fragments were revealed. Sharon, enraged, dismissed it all as witch hunt nonsense. Kelly, according to insiders, asked if her father had been filming a horror movie no one ever knew about. Jack tried to argue that the photos and documents were staged, part of some elaborate game Ozzy played with himself. But the agents weren't laughing. Because tucked into the ledgers, amid the numbers and names, were references to locations outside the mansion. Warehouses, hillside properties, even overseas villas. Were these other sites of ritual? Other vaults? Or safe houses where artifacts were stored away from prying eyes? This is where the emotional punch hits hardest. The idea that Ozzy's mansion wasn't just a freak show of one man's obsessions, but a node in a much larger network. A network that blurred entertainment, power, and ritual into one. And then came the most chilling rumor of all. The one insiders swear is true, but will never appear in any official report. That the cassette marked Play After Death didn't just contain Ozzy's voice. That it contained names, instructions, and a warning. Imagine hearing Ozzy's gravelly voice one last time. Not singing, not laughing, not rambling incoherently, but speaking clearly, with purpose. Imagine him saying the words, "If you're hearing this, it means they got me too." Real or not, that's the legend now whispered about this tape. And legends, as you know, often outlive the truth. But here's the cliffhanger. Because the investigation didn't stop at the mansion, the FBI expanded outward, following the trails in those ledgers, knocking on doors, searching storage units, even flying overseas. And what they uncovered next suggested Ozzy wasn't exaggerating in his journals when he wrote, "They always want more." Because they weren't just after him. They were after everyone.